The sun beat down on the red dust of Blackridge County, Oregon. It was a heat that did not just sit on your skin, it crawled into your lungs. On the edge of the yawning abyss that would soon be the Great Divide Bridge, Sterling Reed stood. His boots were polished. His suit cost more than most men in this county made in 2 years. He looked at the old man. Then he looked at the machine. It was a caterpillar, an old one, a relic from an era when things were built to outlast their owners. But it was not the rust that caught his eye. It was the gold. A shimmering, thin layer of gold leaf covered the hood, the fenders, even the heavy iron grill. Sterling laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the roar of the modern excavators. "What is this, Thorne?" he shouted over the noise. "Did you gold-plate your tractor just to show us how much of our buyout money you have been hoarding? It is a construction site, old man, not a beauty pageant." Jedediah Thorne did not answer immediately. He reached into the pocket of his oil-stained overalls and pulled out a tin of tobacco. His hands were the color of the earth he had farmed for 60 years, deep brown, creased like a topographical map, and steady as a mountain. He tucked a pinch of leaf under his lip. He looked at the gold tractor. He looked at the line of 12 ultra-modern, computer-assisted hydraulic excavators owned by Obsidian Earthworks. "It is just a tool, Mr. Reed," Jedediah said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "And a tool does not care what color it is painted. It only cares about the work." Sterling Reed smirked, turning to his head engineer, a man in a crisp white hard hat. "Record this. I want the board to see what we are dealing with. We offered this man $500,000 for this ridge. He refused. Now he shows up with a gold-plated toy blocking our primary haul road. Tell me, Thorne, are you looking for attention, or has the mountain air finally turned your brain to mush?" The engineers behind him joined in the laughter. They stood next to their machines, monsters of steel with digital displays, GPS tracking, and climate-controlled cabs. To them, Jedediah's caterpillar was a ghost, a joke, a gilded coffin for a dying way of life. Jedediah climbed onto the seat. There was no cab, no air conditioning, just a steel seat polished smooth by decades of use. He gripped the iron levers. "I am not here for your money, Mr. Reed, and I am not here for your attention. I am here because the sky is turning a shade of gray that you city boys do not understand, and when the Red Mud Valley decides to wake up, your shiny computers are not going to save you." He pulled a lever. The engine did not just start, it erupted. A cloud of black smoke billowed into the air, smelling of sulfur and old-world grit. The gold leaf on the hood vibrated, catching the light like a dying star. Sterling Reed checked his gold watch. "We have a schedule to keep. In 2 hours, the concrete pour begins for the main pylon. If that tractor is still in the way, I will have it towed and scrapped, gold and all." Jedediah did not blink. He simply adjusted his cap and looked toward the horizon. A heavy, oppressive silence began to settle over the valley. The wind died down. The birds stopped singing. The air felt thick, like wet wool. The younger engineers continued to snap photos of the gold tractor, posting them online with captions about crazy hillbillies and expensive junk. They did not notice the way the humidity was spiking. They did not notice the fine layer of silt beginning to liquefy under their own heavy treads. They were too busy feeling superior. They were too busy being right. Before we continue this journey into the mud and the secrets of the past, take a moment. You are here because you value the things that last. You value the quiet strength of those who do not need to shout to be heard. In a world of fast-paced noise and temporary fixes, stories like this remind us of who we really are. If you feel that connection to the land, to the history, and to the truth, then you belong with us. Hit that subscribe button and join our circle. It is not just about a video. It is about honoring the legacy of hard work that the world is trying to forget. Do not let the silence win. Join us now." Jedediah watched as the first heavy drop of rain hit the gold hood of his machine. It did not splash, it seemed to explode. Then came the second. Then the sky opened up. This was not an Oregon drizzle. This was a deluge, the kind that turns solid ground into a hungry red soup in a matter of minutes. Sterling Reed ducked under the awning of the command trailer, shouting orders through a radio. "Keep the machines moving. We cannot miss this pour. Move the excavators to the North Ridge now." The modern machines roared to life. Their sensors began to beep. Warning lights flashed on digital dashboards. The soil of Blackridge County was unique, a high concentration of clay and volcanic ash. When dry, it was like concrete. When wet, it turned into something the locals called the Devil's Throat. One by one, the 12-ton obsidian excavators tried to pivot. Their wide, expensive tracks churned the red mud. But the mud did not move. It swallowed. "What is happening?" Sterling screamed into his radio. "Why aren't you moving?" "The traction control is cutting power," a frantic voice replied over the static. "The sensors think we are falling. The software is locking the transmissions to prevent a rollover." The machines were too smart for their own good. They were designed for safety and efficiency in controlled environments. They were not designed for the primal fury of a Blackridge storm. Within 20 minutes, 6 of the state-of-the-art machines were buried up to their axles. They were nothing more than very expensive paperweights. Sterling Reed stood on the edge of the trailer's metal steps, his face pale, watching his multi-million-dollar fleet sink into the crimson abyss. The rain was a solid wall now. The high-intensity LED work lights flickered as the wind whipped through the valley, casting long dancing shadows that made the trapped excavators look like dying prehistoric beasts. "Get the winch! Use the D10! Pull them out!" he screamed into the receiver. But the D10, the heaviest machine they had, was already tilted at a dangerous 15-degree angle. Its computer brain had sensed a structural risk in the saturated soil and had automatically shut down the engine to prevent a catastrophic slide. The smart machine had decided it was safer to be a paperweight than a savior. A few yards away, tucked under a small outcropping of rock, Jedediah Thorne remained on his steel seat. He had pulled a yellow slicker over his shoulders, the heavy rubber crinkling with every movement. He wasn't looking at the sinking machines. He was looking at a small, brass-rimmed pressure gauge on his dashboard. It was a simple needle, no digital readout, no sensor, just a physical reaction to the steam and oil pulsing through the veins of the old Caterpillar. Jedediah reached down and picked up a thermos. He unscrewed the cap and poured a cup of black coffee. The steam rose to meet the cold rain, a small pocket of warmth in a world turning to ice and mud. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He was a man who had seen 80 winters in these mountains. He knew that nature didn't have a schedule. Nature didn't care about quarterly reports or bridge contracts. He watched as a young technician, no older than 22, scrambled out of a sinking cab, his face covered in red slime, weeping with fear. Sterling Reed finally noticed the old man. He noticed the calm. It infuriated him. He jumped from the trailer, his designer shoes disappearing into the muck, ruined instantly. He trudged toward the gold-covered tractor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You!" he yelled, pointing a trembling finger. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? You sat there and watched us drive into a trap." Jedediah lowered his coffee. He didn't look down at Sterling. He looked straight ahead. "I told you the sky was turning, Mr. Reed. I told you the valley was waking up. You were too busy counting the pixels on your screen to listen to the wind." "I don't care about your folk wisdom," Sterling spat, a mixture of rain and mud dripping from his chin. "I'll pay you. Name your price. 10,000, 50,000. Just get that antique in gear and pull my lead excavator out. If it sinks past the hydraulic seals, the repairs will cost more than this whole county is worth." Jedediah turned his head slowly. His eyes were the color of flint. $50,000 is a lot of money to a man like me. But money is just paper. It doesn't have any weight when the mud gets this deep. You called this a toy earlier. You laughed at the gold. Why would you want a toy to do a man's job? Sterling's pride was crumbling faster than the hillside behind them. Please, he whispered, the arrogance finally washed away by the storm. We have men out there. If the ridge slides, those cabs will become coffins. The electronics are dead, and the power-assisted seals have locked them in. With the mud packed against the glass, the manual overrides are stuck fast. They're trapped in a vacuum seal of red clay, and if that ridge slides, those cabs will become pressurized coffins. You're the only one with a machine that isn't controlled by a computer. Jedediah sat in silence for a count of 10. He wasn't weighing the money. He was weighing the soul of the man standing in the mud. He reached into a small metal box bolted to the side of the seat. He didn't pull out a radio or a phone. He pulled out a piece of paper wrapped in a waterproof plastic sleeve. He handed it to Sterling. The paper was yellowed, the edges brittle. It was a land deed, dated 1935, but pinned to it was something else, a hand-drawn map of the valley, showing the ancient drainage veins that the modern geological surveys had missed. At the bottom was a signature, bold and uncompromising, Thorne. My grandfather bought this machine during the Great Depression, Jedediah said, his voice cutting through the roar of the rain. He didn't buy it to be rich. He bought it to keep the neighbors from starving. When the banks came to take the farms, this machine was hidden in a cave. When the floods of '48 hit, this machine pulled the mail truck out of the river. It has never been sold. Not because we couldn't use the money, but because you don't sell your soul just because someone offers you a check. Jedediah took the paper back and tucked it away. I will move your machines, but not for your $50,000. You will sign a notarized agreement right now on your company letterhead. You will bypass the Thorne family cemetery at the end of the valley. You will build a stone retaining wall around it, 3 feet thick, to ensure the runoff from your bridge never touches the headstones of my mother and father, and you will do it at your expense. Sterling didn't hesitate. He couldn't. He signaled his assistant, who brought out a ruggedized tablet. I'll have the legal team drafted and send it to your lawyer immediately. No, Jedediah said. No lawyers. You will write it by hand, in my notebook, here, now, in the rain. A man's word used to be written in ink and blood, not digital ghosts. If you want my help, you will show me that your word has weight. Sterling Reed, the man who handled billion-dollar mergers, knelt in the red mud of Oregon. He huddled beneath the slight overhang of the Caterpillar's massive engine cowl to find a pocket of dry air. Using a heavy grease pencil that could mark even whetstone, he scrawled the promise into the notebook, shielding the paper with his own soaked suit jacket. He signed it, the dark lead biting deep into the grain of the paper. Jedediah took the notebook, glanced at the signature, and nodded. Now, Jedediah said, standing up on the floorboards, get your men clear of the tracks. This is going to get loud. He didn't touch a button. He didn't check a screen. He grabbed the pull cord of the pony motor, the small gasoline engine used to wake the sleeping giant. He gave it a sharp, practiced tug. The small motor sputtered, coughed, and then settled into a high-pitched, steady whine. Jedediah waited, feeling the heat bleed into the massive diesel block. Only when the gauges reached the perfect mark did he engage the main clutch. A cloud of black soot erupted, followed by a rhythmic, primal thumping that shook the ground. The Caterpillar D-Series, 100,000 pounds of American iron, began to breathe. Jedediah shifted into low gear. He didn't use a joystick. He used his entire body, throwing his weight against the levers. The tracks groaned. The metal screamed as it bit into the slick clay. The gold tractor didn't slide. It didn't hesitate. It moved forward with the inevitability of a glacier. The crowd of engineers, now soaked and defeated, watched in stunned silence. They saw the antique descend into the same mud that had claimed their modern wonders. They expected it to sink. They expected the gold to disappear. But the old caterpillar had something their machines lacked: weight distribution designed by men who worked the earth, and a mechanical heart that didn't know how to quit. As the machine reached the first trapped excavator, Jedediah didn't even look at the mud. He looked at the steel. He threw a heavy rusted chain toward the technician huddling on the roof. "Hook it to the frame," he bellowed. "Not the axle, the frame." The chain moaned, a high-pitched metallic shriek that echoed off the canyon walls. It was a sound of two eras colliding. On one end was the obsidian excavator, a machine built in a laboratory by men in white coats. On the other was the gold-plated caterpillar, built in a foundry by men with soot-stained faces. The mud gripped the modern machine with 1,000 invisible hands. It was a vacuum, a relentless suction that had defeated 3,000 horsepower of hydraulic fury. Jedediah Thorne did not rev the engine. He did not slam the gears. He understood something the engineers did not. Momentum is a lie, but torque is a truth. He let the engine settle into a low, guttural throb. It was a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. He eased the clutch just enough to take the slack out of the 3-inch steel links. The gold tractor leaned forward. Its front rollers lifted 6 inches off the ground, a predator tensing its muscles before a strike. "He's going to snap the frame," the head engineer shouted, shielding his eyes from the stinging rain. "The tension is too high. No machine that size can pull 60 tons of dead weight through 10 feet of clay." Jedediah did not hear him. He was listening to the iron. He felt the vibration through the seat of his pants, through the palms of his hands. He knew when the iron was happy and when it was screaming. He whispered a single word to the machine, a word lost in the wind. Then he pinned the throttle. The world disappeared behind a curtain of black smoke and red spray. The gold leaf on the engine cowls seemed to catch the lightning from the clouds, shimmering like an ancient idol. The tracks did not spin. They bit. They dug through the topsoil, through the clay, until they found the bedrock of the mountain itself. And then the impossible happened. The 60-ton excavator began to move, slowly at first, 1 inch, 2 inches. The mud gave up a sound like a giant gasping for air as the seal was broken. The smart machine, with its locked brakes and frozen computers, was being dragged out of its grave by a relic. Jedediah's face remained a mask of stone. He did not cheer. He did not smile. He simply worked the levers, a conductor leading a symphony of grinding metal. Sterling Reed watched from the sidelines, his expensive leather briefcase forgotten in the mud. He saw his workers, men who had spent the morning mocking the hillbilly, now standing in the rain, mesmerized. Some were filming with their phones, but most were just staring. They were witnessing the death of their own arrogance. They saw that all their sensors, their GPS, and their automated systems were useless without the one thing the old man possessed, a soul that understood the earth. One by one, the gold tractor extracted the fleet. It took 4 hours, 4 hours of relentless, soul-crushing labor. The rain did not let up. The wind grew colder. By the time the final machine was dragged onto the gravel of the North Ridge, the gold leaf on Jedediah's tractor was nearly gone, stripped away in long ribbons by the abrasive grit of the mud and the bite of the steel chains. Large patches of raw, dark iron were exposed, scarred and gray. It no longer looked like a trophy. The gold that remained was deep in the crevices, a memory of beauty. It looked like a soldier returning from a war it had won. As the last engine of the modern fleet was shut down, a heavy silence returned to the valley. The only sound was the steady tink-tink-tink of the caterpillar's cooling manifold. Jedediah climbed down from the seat. His legs were stiff. His back was a map of pain. He walked over to a puddle and washed his hands, the red water swirling into the gray. Sterling Reed approached him. He looked different now. The polish was gone. He looked small. He held the notebook in his hand, the ink of his promise smeared by the rain but still legible. "You saved us," Sterling said, his voice cracking. "The damages alone. The insurance wouldn't have covered the delay. I owe you more than a stone wall." Jedediah looked at the man. He didn't see a villain anymore. He just saw a man who had finally learned the value of a foundation. "You owe me nothing but the wall, Mr. Reed. A deal is a deal. In this county, we don't move the goalposts once the game has started." "But why?" Sterling asked, gesturing toward the mud-caked machine. "Why gold? You could have bought 5 new tractors with what that leafing cost. You could have lived in a palace in the city. Why spend it on a machine that you treat like a pack mule?" A small crowd of workers gathered around, their breath visible in the cold air. They all wanted to know. They wanted the secret of the gold tractor. Jedediah walked to the front of the machine. He took a rag from his pocket and wiped a small patch on the hood, revealing a glimpse of the shimmering metal beneath the grime. "I didn't buy the gold," Jedediah said softly, "and I didn't put it there. My 12 grandchildren did. Each one of them saved their pennies for 3 years. They bought the gold leaf, and they spent a whole summer applying it with tiny brushes." He looked at the machine, and for the first time his eyes softened. They did it because this machine didn't just farm wheat. It didn't just pull trucks. During the Great Famine of the 30s, when the government was burning crops and people were starving, my grandfather used this tractor to clear the hidden valley behind that ridge. He grew potatoes in secret. He fed 40 families for 2 years. He never took a dime. He said the land provides, and the machine serves. He paused, touching a deep scratch in the gold. "When my son, their father, was trapped under a fallen timber in the blizzard of '78, this was the only engine in the county that would start in 40 below weather. It broke the trail for the doctor. It saved a life. To my grandkids, this isn't just iron. It's the reason they exist. They wanted the world to see it the way they see it. They wanted it to look like the treasure it is." The silence that followed was heavier than the mud. The engineers looked at their own machines, clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of history. They realized that they weren't looking at an antique. They were looking at a monument to human resilience. "I'll never sell it," Jedediah said, his voice regaining its flinty edge, "because you can't put a price on the thing that carries your family's heartbeat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a cemetery wall to supervise, and I expect the first stone to be laid by sunrise." Sterling Reed looked at the notebook, then at the old man, and finally at the mud-stained gold. He didn't say a word. He simply nodded and stepped aside, making a path for the man and his machine. The dawn that broke over Blackridge County the following morning was not pink or gold. It was a bruised purple, the color of a healing wound. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a world that smelled of wet slate and ancient, disturbed earth. The valley was a graveyard of ambition. The 12 excavators of obsidian earthworks sat motionless, their high-tech cooling fans silent, their sensors caked in the very mud they were supposed to conquer. In the center of the site, a different kind of work was beginning. Sterling Reed did not go to his trailer to sleep. He did not call his lawyers to find a loophole in the handwritten contract. Instead, he stood by a pile of raw granite blocks that had been delivered by a local quarry truck at 3 in the morning. Beside him, Jedediah Thorne stood, his hands tucked into the pockets of his heavy coat. "The mortar needs to be thick," Jedediah said, his voice rasping from the cold air. "The frost in this valley can crack a mountain if you give it a seam. You want this wall to be here when your great-grandchildren are old men." Sterling Reed picked up a trowel. His hands, usually reserved for signing checks and scrolling through data, were shaking. He didn't know how to lay stone. He didn't know the rhythm of the earth. But as he looked at the small, humble cemetery at the edge of the Thorne property, the simple headstones worn smooth by a century of Oregon wind, he felt a weight in his chest that no bank balance could offset. He realized that for all his talk of building the future, he was a man with no past. He had no anchor. He was a ghost moving through a world of solid things. For 3 days, the bridge project stood still. The board of directors at Obsidian Earthworks was frantic, sending messages about liquidated damages and lost revenue. Sterling ignored them. He spent those 72 hours in the mud, working alongside the engineers who had previously laughed at the gold tractor. They weren't laughing now. They were quiet. They moved with a new kind of respect, not just for Jedediah, but for the labor itself. They were learning that a machine is only as good as the history it carries. When the wall was finished, it was a masterpiece of rugged utility. It didn't look like a corporate landscaping project. It looked like it had grown out of the ridge. It was a fortress for the dead, built by the living who had finally understood the cost of progress. Jedediah walked the length of the wall, his boots crunching on the gravel. He ran his hand over the cold granite. He stopped at the gate, where the gold-plated caterpillar sat idling. The mud had dried on its fenders, a thick crust that hid the shimmering leaf beneath. To a stranger, it looked like a wreck. To the men on the ridge, it looked like a god. Sterling Reed approached him. He looked 10 years older and 20 years wiser. "We're moving the Hall Road," Sterling said. "It will cost us an extra 3 weeks and $2 million in fuel, but the cemetery will stay quiet. You have my word, and this time you don't need it in a notebook." Jedediah nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. "You've got dirt under your fingernails, Mr. Reed. Keep it there. It reminds a man where he's going to end up." As the Obsidian Earthworks convoy finally began to move, retreating from the Thorn Land to find a less sacred path, the head engineer stopped by Jedediah one last time. "Why don't you wash it?" he asked, gesturing to the tractor. "The gold. You could make it shine again, show everyone what it really is." Jedediah looked at the machine. He saw the scratches. He saw the dents from the heavy chains. He saw the red Oregon clay that had become part of its skin. "It doesn't need to shine for the world to see," Jedediah replied. "The gold is still there. It's always been there. But a tool that's too clean is a tool that's forgotten its purpose. The mud is just another layer of its story." Jedediah climbed onto the seat. He engaged the gears. The old caterpillar didn't roar. It purred, a deep, satisfied vibration that resonated in the bones of everyone standing on the ridge. He drove it back toward his barn, moving slowly across the land his grandfather had saved. Sterling Reed watched the machine disappear into the shadows of the pine trees. He knew that when he returned to the city, he would be fired. The board wouldn't understand the delay. They wouldn't understand the stone wall. They wouldn't understand the gold. But as he stood on the ridge, looking at the sturdy granite boundary he had helped build, he realized he didn't care. For the first time in his life, he had built something that wasn't for sale. The world often tells us that newer is better, that the old must be paved over to make room for the shiny. But the earth remembers. It remembers the sweat of the honest man and the greed of the hollow one. It remembers that the true value of a thing isn't found in a catalog, but in the lives it has touched and the storms it has weathered. If you are someone who still believes in the power of a legacy, if you believe that some things are worth more than a paycheck, then you are the reason we tell these stories. You are the guardians of the old ways in a world that is moving too fast. Do not let the dust settle on your own history. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the gold in your own life, then stand with us. Subscribe to this channel, not just for the videos, but to ensure that the voice of the Stoic, the hardworking, and the honest is never silenced. Join our community of those who look beneath the surface, because the world may laugh today, but tomorrow when the mud gets deep, they will be looking for a man like Jedediah Thorn, and they will be looking for a machine that was never meant to be sold. Jedediah reached his barn and shut down the engine. The silence that followed was profound. He sat there for a long time in the dim light, his hand resting on the iron lever. The gold was hidden, but he knew it was there, and that was enough.